Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here today to talk about some of the work we're doing at Carnegie Mellon and share with you some of our thinking around the issue of supplementary data associated with ETDs. First, I'd like to provide a little bit of a background, give you some history of Carnegie Mellon, and talk about our graduate student output, and talk about the current ETD program and how we arrived at where we're at, and highlight some of the issues around supporting supplemental data when it comes to ETDs, and discuss some of our thinking around possible solutions and the implications for those solutions. Carnegie Mellon University is located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is in the northeastern part of the United States. We have 7 colleges on our main campus in the city, but we really see ourselves as a global research university. We have a campus in Qatar. We have a program in Australia. I believe our largest footprint in Europe is in Barcelona. So we have these 17 international programs and locations, as well as 2 immersion programs. The first would be in business in New York City, where we send people to New York to learn the business of doing business. And the second is in Hollywood, and it's associated with the School of Drama, where people go to learn about the entertainment industry. We also have a number of graduate programs that are interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. For example, we have a program that combines the Department of English with the School of Design to teach people things like web development and good communication skills. So my point in all of that is we have a lot of content coming from a multitude of directions, but yet we're a relatively small school. I think many people have heard of Carnegie Mellon. We have done a lot of innovative work there, so people somehow are under the impression that we're this very large school, when in fact we're actually pretty small. 12,000 students, 5,000 faculty. Most of the faculty are either research faculty, very few teaching faculty, so we're just not that big. So Carnegie Mellon was founded by Andrew Carnegie, who decided that he needed skilled labor for his industries, and decided to build a school to fill that labor gap. And so we really were technical schools. We weren't able to grant degrees until 1912, when the school petitioned the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and were granted that honor. Soon after, 1914, we began issuing master's degrees. The first 3, I think, were in engineering and then 1 in architecture. Our first PhD was issued in 1920. Interestingly enough, it was to a Chinese citizen who took his degree back to China and began building bridges. He was in civil engineering, and these bridges are still in use today, and he's considered a national hero there. Currently, we have 42 doctoral programs, 41 master's programs. Not all of our master's programs require a thesis. So, we do not have a centralized graduate school. This becomes a very serious problem for us managing this content and working through some of these issues. Each of the 7 colleges works through managing this output their own way. Some colleges provide some strong leadership around this, so the libraries may work with 1 or 2 people within that college. Other colleges provide virtually no leadership around this, and you end up working with separate departments. And so for one college, you may end up working with a half a dozen people. We do know that we produce about 250 dissertations annually, and we know that by simply looking at the commencement program and counting the number of PhDs offered that year. Primary format until very recently, paper. We were really behind the curve around this issue. Would not accept anything else. We'd receive 2 copies. One would get bound, put in the library. The other one sent off to ProQuest, where it was scanned, and we would have access to the electronic copy. Because we were only accepting paper, we did not accept supplementary materials. And so the message went out on campus, please don't send us these files. And we did a very good job of that. Last year we got a new dean, Keith Webster. Some of you may be familiar with him. Very much a visionary by our standards. He came in, asked the question, why have we not shifted to an ETD program? The response from one of the library leaders said, well, we're moving in that direction. We think we can get there in about 10 years. He laughed and said, no, I'm thinking 10 weeks. At which point I was put in charge of creating an ETD program. So from that, you can sense that I met with some resistance. And because of the resistance, I decided to keep the workflow relatively simple. And we essentially just replicated the system that we had in paper. We just replicated that for the electronic submission instead. So essentially, the academic department still send us, they put it on a virtual server, their ETD. They send paper documents indicating the students' desires for open access. Do they want it to go in the IR? Do they want it to go to ProQuest or not? And then we send off the electronic file to ProQuest. So really our goal is to put the content into the IR as much as possible. Our IR is Research Showcase, that's what we call it. It's the bPress platform called Digital Commons, so several of you may be familiar with this platform. It's very easy to use. I can teach you how to upload content in about a half an hour. We can distribute the responsibility for uploading content into this because it is that easy to use. But the problem is it's not very robust. Really, when it comes down to it, only supports the PDF format. They'll tell you that it supports other things, but really what you're doing is you're putting that content elsewhere. For example, if you have a video file, you put that into YouTube and then link to the descriptive metadata in Digital Commons. And so that's a little scary because now you've lost control of these files and you can't trust YouTube to take care of your video files. It also doesn't do a few other things that we would like to do, such as supporting author unique identifiers and persistent identifiers that are generated externally. We are doing an ORCID rollout, and we are working with the California Digital Library around generating persistent identifiers through EasyID. And when you talk to bPress, they will tell you that's in the development works. We've been hearing that for a number of years. So ultimately, this is our platform, and this is the things that feed it. For the most part, it's really the descriptive metadata with links out, although for some content, like the ETDs where we have a PDF, we will actually have the PDF in it. The platform is actually pretty good for managing conference proceedings and journals because that's what it was designed to do. It really wasn't designed to handle these more complex digital files. So ultimately, we can place the PDF of the thesis or dissertation, but not the supplemental data. And I put this graphic up there because the emoticon was invented at Carnegie Mellon in 1982, and Mr. Yuck. So this is like a hybrid of Mr. Yuck and the emoticon. So when you start to look at the supplemental data, what does it look like? Well, here's just a sample of what we're seeing. And some of these files can be rather large, but they share characteristics with other types of data that we've seen. And that's with research data. So fortunately for us, because we began our ETD program so late, it actually dovetailed with our program to manage research data. US federal mandates around this are relatively new. Organizations in the United States are just getting up and running and organizing around this issue. And so we, like our colleagues in other parts of the United States, are starting to assemble programs and sets of services around managing research data. And so we could look at this content of ETDs and research data and see that they share a number of characteristics. But there are one or two interesting differences. US mandates require that we provide access to and preserve research data for the life cycle of the research project. Some of the disciplines are talking about different time frames, but right now we're thinking 3 or 5 years. But if you have supplemental files for ETDs, you're going to have to take care of those forever. Those are the promises you're going to have to make, because if people start citing that content, and if we have an expectation that data submissions will carry the same weight as journal submissions, we have to make that commitment to take care of this material forever. So that places an additional burden on around the preservation issue. Also, research data, you may have the article in a journal, it may be a monograph, the dissertation may be in ProQuest, it may be in your IR. But the other types of characteristics are very similar. We know we need a slightly different schema. It's probably got a Dublin core, but there are going to be requirements around some additional fields. We want persistency for either the author ID as well as links to the data themselves. So data management services began at Carnegie Mellon in 2013. The ETD program actually began in January. And since we see the similar characteristics, our approach is to manage them the same way. So on the surface you think, well, that's not so bad. I mean, you can just go and do that. These are our two main repository, our registry and our repository. The registry will be the IR, our vPress platform for now. The data repository is another proprietary system called Archivalware by PTFS. We selected that system because it supports a wide variety of formats. It gives us levels of granularity that we like around control. So far we haven't broken it. It supports a variety of metadata models. We're going with the data site metadata model. And so our plan for right now is to keep working with that system until we break it, see how dissatisfied we are, and then possibly turn our attention to an open source system and join that party. But you look at this and you think, okay, that's not such a big deal. You put your data into one system, you link to it in the registry, and problem solved. But really, when you begin to put more of the workflow together, you see it's far more complex than that. And this is a very simplified version of the workflow. We still get materials from the academic departments. They go into the library, they're registered in the IR. The data then is sent to Archivalware. It's linked back and forth. ProQuest may want to link to our data in our repository. One of the problems that we have with ProQuest, they will take supplemental files, but my understanding is there's a 250 megabyte limit to those files. We have graduate students who are doing their doctoral work, working with MRIs, brain scans. You know, we're talking about files that measure in the terabytes. And so the 250 megabyte limit isn't going to work for us. So we still need a place to park that data and link to it. So what are the implications of this? Well, it's going to force a change, yet again, of our workflow for ETDs. I guess if I wanted to make one point here today, is if you're worried about managing supplemental data for your ETDs, stop thinking about ETDs. Start thinking about research data services. Maybe you have to be talking to other sets of people within the library, or you may have responsibilities for both areas. I think that some of the people I've talked to here in Europe are already doing that, but you may be in an institution, say in the United States, where one part of your library works on ETDs, another part may or may not have started working on research data management. What I'm saying is both sides of that library need to talk to one another, and you may need to actually pull some of that responsibility away from the ETD people and hand it over to the research data management people. We also have to do a better job of broadcasting our willingness to accept these files. People on our campus don't necessarily know that we're open for business in this way. And we have to rethink long-term preservation of ETD data. We're continuing our work with the Meta Archive. We've got some interesting research projects going on there. And Matt Schultz is here, and I think he's going to talk about that later on. But we are a member of the Meta Archive, and we're looking for some possible solutions to come out of that work. And so that's essentially it. I'm open for questions. Yes.
Hi, I'm Gail from Texas A&M.
Yeah.
I had two related questions.
Sure.
I can help with it. The first one is for Gail. Is with regard to repositing your data, your premise about repositing the data sets in the institutional repository, whatever it is. Right now it's your PTFS system.
Right.
But do you get any pushback at all from the researchers, meaning the faculty advisors, that they would prefer to see their data, since it could be group-owned, or often they're the PI of the project, so that the grad student, the doctoral student, may not be the owner of the IP in the underlying data as they are with the dissertation proper. Do you get pushback about either not exposing that data yet or embargoing that data until the whole group is ready to publish as co-authors? Or third, what I'm bumping into is a preference from the PIs, from the faculty advisors, to reposit their data in their birds of a feather repository, meaning their own disciplinary data center or a subject data repository. So that's question one. The other one is, I was just curious that you've gone ProQuest optional. I didn't realize that. And I was wondering what the uptake rate of the students is now that they don't have to do that.
Wow, there's a lot there. Okay, so the first question is, we would prefer that data go into subject repositories, because if they're there, if they exist and they're trusted, we're fine with that. What we're finding is that many of our researchers don't have these repositories available to them. So we're really talking about taking what I call orphan data. I know that's not a great term, but really data that doesn't have any place to go, and so we feel compelled to take care of it. What we're hearing from our advisors and faculty researchers is that they feel that preservation and access, they're so important that they're willing to work with us to solve these problems. What they want more than anything else is guidance around some simple preservation activities, such as file naming schemas and being consistent, because they think that a little early intervention will go a long way to taking care of their materials. And so what we're starting to see as we open that door a crack in terms of offering services, that as we open the door, more and more requests are flooding in. So we haven't met too much resistance yet. However, if someone would like to embargo their data, one of the nice things about the PTFS system is it allows us to identify particular data sets and embargo those. So we can offer that. So I haven't seen that as much. To answer your second question, when given the choice, would you like your content to go to the IR or ProQuest or both? We're really seeing that students are selecting to put it in the IR and not go to ProQuest.
Can you give a percentage-ish ballpark?
We've only, no, not at this point, it's just too soon. But I'll pay attention to that, and that would be an interesting thing to put out there. Yeah.
Hi. It's very good to see the sort of integration of different types of services you're putting together in order that you, in some sense, you maintain tempo or momentum to some extent on that. Coming from the other side in terms of research data services, what about services for those who seek data for their purpose? In other words, data library services. I think that somehow at the moment we've got a lot of compliance over how you are good at storing or describing, etc. And maybe what we're not putting enough emphasis on is serving the needs of those who use data for secondary purposes, which after all is why everyone goes to so much trouble after all.
That's interesting because we're starting to receive those questions from our researchers, where they want to see the data sets behind journal articles. And this has become the best teaching tool for our liaison librarians. It really helps them make that connection between why it's important to put the data behind the journal article or the monograph, because now they can go and move toward finding that data and actually feeling good about providing a service that's needed. We're also seeing that request come through our interlibrary loan program, where people are asking for the data behind dissertations. And we have found that we spend a lot of time sort of looking at different institutions' IRs, looking for that data. And I think it would be helpful if we could really work on creating the metadata schema that will allow you to link to that data and at least give people a hint of where that data might be found, because as I pointed out, it may be in a different place altogether from where the original publication is. And so I think whatever we can do to help standardize that would be helpful. But we're just getting into looking for data for people, getting those requests, and as I say, we've just found them to be extremely helpful. It's difficult sometimes working with liaison librarians who don't understand why this is so important, and yet we're expecting them to be on the front line and advocating for this, and making those connections is a great way to do it.
Okay, I'm going to hand the microphone over. Before I do, iassistdata.org
Yeah.
is the place to go.
Right.
Okay, a related question. I think one of the things that concerns me, and when I said before that the real challenge to me is open data, let me perhaps explain what I mean to that in the context of your paper, is that to me the real value of research data are not treating individual data objects in a discrete fashion, but it's actually how you dissect the data and put them back together to form what is not hopefully a Frankenstein, but a perfectly formed, super new being, if you see what I mean. And thinking about what you just said, where you're saying, well, people are coming to us asking whether or not there is a research data set that is appropriate to their needs. The danger is, it's a bit like saying, is there one book that I have to read in order to do my research? And invariably there isn't. That's not the way you do research, nor is it possibly the way we should be doing data analysis, and that actually what you need is a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this over here. And that, to me, is the real challenge of open data, about how we construct entire new data properties from the bodies of existing objects.
So I'm probably didn't make myself clear. We are starting to see faculty asking for very specific data sets that reside behind the journal article. Not necessarily I need data that will help me understand this, but rather very specific data sets. And so being able to go find that data has been a challenge, but it's really opened liaison librarians' eyes. But no, I do understand. I believe that these things go in waves. I've seen this long enough, where first you put you build the infrastructure and you put the content out there, and then you begin building tools to pile on top to analyze and to work with it in a more meaningful way. And I believe that Australia and the UK are certainly ahead of the US around some of these issues, and I think you're starting to see some of the second wave issues surface where you're starting to ask the questions, okay, we've built some of these things, we've got these services, now what? How do we really make this stuff useful? Where in the US, we're still trying to figure out what are our services, how do we roll them out? How can we really support research on our campuses? And I believe that we'll catch up, and we'll probably be there in a year or two, and we're going to start asking the kind of questions that you're throwing out there. And so thank you for doing that, because it helps us to think this thing through earlier on in the process.
We just have time for one more question. I think Susie, you were first.
I'll be quick. I'm over here. Do you have them do you have them also store workflow with their data set so you can see exactly how they chose to manipulate the data for the work they did? So are you saving workflows as well as the data itself?
Not at this point. Not at this point. This is constantly open to debate on our campus, where we have some researchers who want to preserve all of that information, all of that metadata, and we have some researchers who think they can just rerun those analyses and they can get to that spot just by, rerunning those statistical analyses or whatever it is they did to get there in the first place, and so they don't see a need to preserve that stuff. I think this is an interesting conversation we need to continue on our campus.